Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, here with relatively new to the volume from Fantasy Pros, Thor Nystrom, living from Minnesota. Interested to hear how my man feels about the quarterback turnover there. Kirk Cousins cashes in again, and you get Sam Darnold rolling to the Twin Cities. How you doing, Thor?
Hey, I'm doing great, John. Good to be with you. And yeah, very excited, to be honest, about Mr. Cousins leaving, because it opens up a war chest of cap room for my Vikings in 2025 after the dead cap hit of Cousins and Danielle Hunter and Marcus Davenport come off the cap from 2024. And then, of course, opens up the possibility of moving up for the first-round quarterback that us locals around here have been begging for now for multiple years. So it's a very exciting time.
I mean, you guys haven't had a high-drafted pick. How high did Dante Culpepper go?
11, interestingly enough. And in Dante's draft class, 1999, quarterbacks went 1, 2, 3. Vikings got QB4 in the 11 slot. At the time, they had the best young receiver in football, Randy Moss, but no quarterback of the future on the roster. This year, the Vikings sit with the 11th pick. Seems like it could go quarterback 1, 2, 3. They have Justin Jefferson, wondering who their quarterback of the future is. But I don't know. I really like the top 4 quarterbacks in this class. So assuming Minnesota can get one of those top 4 guys, I think they're going to be set up really well.
You know, it's kind of crazy to think about. I guess, the Chiefs went through this forever, right? Never had a homegrown guy, always patchworking. 1999, I don't know how old you are. That was like I was in junior high. That feels like a lifetime ago, right? And it's a lot of Tavares Jacksons, a lot of Brett Favre's, Kirk Cousins. There's something about, let's face it, there's just something special about drafting the guy, and whether he becomes the next Joe Montana or Patrick Mahomes, even if he becomes Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, it makes watching football pretty freaking fun knowing you got a guy for a decade plus.
It sure does. I feel like it both, obviously it raises your ceiling, because if you hit on that guy, if you get the Pat Mahomes, if you get the Josh Allen, whatever, obviously you become the contender. But I also think sneakily, and I don't think this gets discussed enough, I also think it raises your floor, because it allows you to make mistakes with your other personnel decisions where it's not as pressing that every single one is right. The issue with Kirk Cousins here in Minnesota here the last 3-4 years and what it did to the cap was every single decision needed to be right. They didn't have any margin for error, even on the margins. Everything needed to be right. And then Kwesi, his first draft was not very good. The last one looks a little bit better. But then, a couple of those Spielman drafts at the end were not the best either. And so, that's how you got into the situation that you ended up getting into. But you have that rookie, on the rookie scale deal at the quarterback position. All of a sudden, now you're paying the quarterback, $40 million less or whatever. That money can all be delineated into the rest of the roster. Now, this defense that the Vikings have had that hasn't been very good, you can fortify that. The interior offensive line that we have been complaining about for multiple years, you can fortify that. You have money for a running back, which they did not have last year. They were able to go out and sign Aaron Jones. And next offseason is where the fireworks are truly going to start. That's where Minnesota is projected to be number 1 in the NFL in cap room.
The crazy thing about some of these big trades that we've seen a lot of them, right, over the last 7-8 years, guys going for multiple first-round picks. Jamal Adams, Khalil. The 49ers did it once with DeForest, but they didn't get multiple, but they got the 13th overall pick. And Javon Kinlaw ended up on the Jets now and was a whiff. And they traded back a spot and got worse. And I love picks as much as you love picks, as much talking about the draft. But eventually you got to draft the right guys, right? And
yes,
I ran into Rick Spielman at the Combine, and I was like, listen, obviously it ended poorly, but I think you're really good at your job. I mean, he drafted a lot of impact guys in a lot of different rounds.
Justin Jefferson at the end there.
Remember that celebration when Rager went in front of them and they got Justin Jefferson, but it was the Eric Kendricks, the Harrison Smiths, just a lot of good personnel moves. And let's face it, most GMs, and the stats will tell you this, even the best ones, are going to miss on a lot more picks than they hit on.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. And That's like one thing with my job. I put out a 500 player big board with 500 comps, whatever. You're making 500 predictions on outcomes that haven't occurred yet. Of course, you're going to miss there. And GMs with their picks, they're going to miss as well. These are all outcomes that haven't occurred yet. And, as you know, John, as a former scout, it's an art. It is not a science. There is no, even the prospects that look like they're the closest to can't miss, there is a path for them to miss.
For
So, I
sure.
mean, yeah, you just have to crunch all the data and then just make the best situational assumptions that you can once that decision is due. That's the best you can do.
Well, I know one thing philosophically I'm just adamant against is guys high in the first round, Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett. There is no such thing in a draft as a high floor, right? It doesn't exist, right? The guy could just be bad, not good enough. And so when you draft guys really high, it's one thing taking high floor guys mid round, late round, totally understand, whatever, you like the player. But I am not, I'm trying to hit big swings because there's no guarantee. So when you draft Mac Jones, your margin for error is actually much smaller because the best case scenario, he might be Kirk Cousins. Well, Kirk Cousins
Yeah.
is like a fringe top 10 quarterback. So if that's your best case scenario, your worst case scenario is probably even worse, which it became. Or Kenny Pickett, who has a little less sample size because he's been injured, but still, it's pretty clear physically. Like, I'm okay with taking Anthony Richardson high. He might not be good, but his ceiling is so much higher. I will never budge off that philosophically when it comes to quarterbacks, swinging big guys with attributes.
Yeah, at that position, yes. You swing big or go home. Yeah, you have to do that. And if you hit on the guy, that's where you have the cheat code against the rest of the NFL for the next 4 years of 5 years, whatever, of
For
that
sure.
rookie contract. That's how you win Super Bowls. You either that or you have one of the 3, 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL. But we know by the data now, those are the two paths to get in there.
I had Matthew Berry on at the combine, and I'm not a huge fantasy guy, though obviously it's impossible not to follow it. And when you follow the NFL, it's all baked in one now. You've been in this business for a long time. Now, you were at Roto World, which when I was in the NFL, we used to gather injury information, right? So like when a guy was injured, we didn't put it in the system, and it was kind of like I was telling you before we press record, it was kind of Twitter before Twitter. And today it's still Twitter, but without Twitter, no other stuff. It's just you can just click on football or basketball or whatever. And I asked Barry this, like, when did he know it was going to be so big? Was there a moment like when you got into it? I'm sure you just love football, enjoyed playing fantasy. Was there a moment over the last decade? I mean, now you're part of, is it the biggest fantasy football podcast in the country by a pretty wide margin? It feels like.
Yeah,
When did you know?
yeah, yeah. With Fantasy Pros or with Roto World?
Just with the industry.
Oh, yeah, it's been kind of a wild ride. Like when I came out of undergrad, I thought I was going to be one of the guys with the microphone, in the locker room after the game, where you're just writing about the thing that you've already seen, right? And then you're giving the quotes. And what were you feeling when you caught the game-winning touchdown and all that nonsense? But the media landscape, it changed so dramatically. And I think we're about the same age. I graduated undergrad 2008. The
Yeah,
newspaper
same.
industry was, oh, okay, it's the exact same age. Newspaper industry was crumbling at that time. And so I just sort of had to figure it out as we went, and the internet jobs were opening up, and the fantasy community, and then the betting community as well is the other big one that I'm in. It showed a shift in the way that people wanted to consume sports media. Instead of being told about the thing that already happened, that they had already watched, that they could get alerts on their phone, that they could watch on their phone, different stuff like that. They wanted to be told about what could happen so they could invest in that, be that from a fantasy perspective, who should I draft, who should I start, or from a betting perspective, who should I lay the points? Should I take the dog? Should I be on the money line? NFL draft props. I've been nailing these things now since they came out last 2, 3 weeks. I can't wait till they drop more of them. But if you can be ahead of the market on various things, you get ahead of the market moves. One of them in the NFL draft already, John, in the prop market, they put out Drake Maye was the prohibitive favorite to go number 2 to begin with, because of course the narrative was always Caleb Williams QB1 with a bullet, Drake Maye QB2 with a bullet. I disagreed with that. First of all, I don't think that Drake Maye is QB2 in this class. Number 2, I don't think that he is the best fit for Cliff Kingsbury's offense. In fact, I think he is the fourth best fit for Cliff Kingsbury's offense of those top four quarterbacks. So I put out a thread on Twitter. Drake Maye should not be the favorite to go number two. Here's a brief thread why. And I got into all the reasons why. At that time, Drake Maye was minus 150 favorite on the board. Today, if you look, the last time I checked, Jayden Daniels is now minus 175. He was the guy that I was advocating should be the favorite. The odds board has just completely shifted. But it's you're reading the tea leaves and predictive analysis, different stuff like that. That is the way that this landscape has changed. And over the entire course of my career, coming out from undergrad, you've seen it shift more and more and more, and it's just going to keep going that way.
Do you think, because we often say the NFL's never been more popular than it currently is in 2024, is it safe to say fantasy football has never been more popular than it currently is today?
That's safe to say. And it's safe to say that there's never been more sports betting handle in America as well. And those two things I would suggest.
Do you combine those two things the way you're talking? Do you think they're kind of one under the same umbrella?
I do. Yeah, because you're speaking to the same thing. You're trying to predict also it's sort of like NFL draft analysis in some ways. You're trying to predict outcomes that haven't occurred yet. You're crunching data in order to try to get an advantage on all your other competitors, a monetary advantage by winning your league or winning your bet against the book, whatever. So that's where I think this thing is. And I think it's going to keep going that way.
Well, the one thing fantasy football I started doing, I moved to Arizona several years ago, and the DraftKings app, the ability to play these props on an individual basis definitely go hand in hand, right? If you're going to go over under Brandon Ayuk catches or Aaron Jones rushing attempts, I mean, it's not even just yards, touchdowns, rushing attempts. It's pretty incredible. And obviously those two things definitely go hand in hand. And I would say the prop betting market is probably going to hasn't even scratched the surface of the popularity of what it's going to be over the next decade, right?
Totally agree. Yeah, I think we're at right now 38 states in the United States have legalized sports betting. We need to get to 50. We need to get the whole federal restrictions lifted, everything like that. Once the prohibition era ends in America against sports gambling, everything's going to open up. We'll have more brick and mortars, the apps, there won't be restrictions on that. And you're going to see even more of this shift in the media at that point, because then there's going to be even more people seeking out this kind of content. So I think that's 100%. John, my favorite prop on those apps is the NFL Combine props. I love the 40 props. Prize Picks drops them, and Underdog dropped them this year as well. Those things are like shooting fish in a barrel. If you're down there in the weeds with this kind of stuff, it's always fun betting on those.
You bring up Jayden Daniels. LSU, once it was clear they were kind of out of the mix for a playoff spot, I didn't watch them as much. And I went back after the combine because everyone was talking about the three wide receivers. And, you watch a lot of Rome. I did living on the West Coast. I've watched a ton of Marvin Harrison. I was like, okay, this Malik Neighbors guy. And you just pull up YouTube, the highlights. Obviously, he won the Heisman. But when you watch him, you go, he's got a huge arm. He's a big-time athlete. He can move. He's accurate. He has touch. I understood all the hype behind really the only knock on him. And you saw this at the combine. You kind of see it he's skinny relative, but he's not small. He's just thinner, right? He's not built like I saw Caleb Williams today at the golf tournament. He's thick, right?
Yes.
And I would imagine he weighs 215, 220 pounds. Even Kyler Murray was short. He was thick. But other than that, I do understand where the love comes from this guy's physical traits. And I don't even think it's out of the realm of possibility, because football is so much about scheme fit, about who's coaching you, the institution around you, your head coach, the vision of he could be he could turn out to be the best quarterback. Because Caleb, if he goes to Chicago, historically, it's not exactly a Mr. Quarterback organization, right?
I think so. Yeah, that's very well said. And Daniels, yeah, I mean, he's tall, he's rail thin, sort of the opposite build of a Caleb Williams, like you were mentioning. I think when I think Jayden Daniels going to the NFL, I think of him as a guy that's bringing two superpowers with him, proven that will translate. Number one, he's a deep ball assassin. You were sort of mentioning that.
Yeah.
It's not just the arm strength to get it down there. His touch is ridiculous. It's like a pool shark, but he's doing trick shots. He jumps the ball and everything. He can drop the thing wherever he wants, just out of the sky. He just airmails it into it like a little into the mail, wherever he wants. So it's the deep ball thing, and then the being able to hurt you with his legs once he breaks containment. So you have the dichotomy of those two different things, and it becomes for the opposing defensive coordinator and the opposing defense both a spacing problem and then a numbers problem because it becomes this puzzle. Do we put two safeties back? Because now he can't throw deep, or we're better suited to defend that. But if you do that, now he has a better opportunity to run around. You don't have as many guys up there. Also, the intermediate range, he showed that he can attack there as well. Do you keep a spy on him? Then you keep the 1,000+ yard legs. You tamper down on the danger of that. But how are you going to do that if you have two deep safeties? Do you try to sort of split the middle and ramp up the aggression on him on the blitz? They tried that last year. You know who the highest graded PFF quarterback against the blitz was last year in this class?
Jayden.
Mr. Jayden Daniels. So, I mean, like, the improvements he has made are just so impressive since that 2021 season. His career started fine at Arizona State after he got signed by Herm Edwards, was like the face of the franchise there. Stagnated in 2021. That's why he came over to LSU. They fixed his propensity to put the ball up for grabs and make wonky decisions in 2022, but he wasn't generating the explosive plays. This past season, he was both taking care of the ball, but then you added the explosive element. You bring those two superpowers with you. I agree with you, John. I think he has a very high floor. I think he also has a very, very high ceiling just because of that. There are a couple things that, concern me-ish. Concern is probably not a good way to put it, but I think that he needs to keep working on. What you brought up, the frame thing. When he runs, he needs to start sliding. He didn't really slide in college, and you'd see him get blasted. That's a pretty obvious one. Another one, as far as him in the pocket, I love how he manipulates the pocket. I love how he keeps his eyes up. He's a full field reader. And I like that he does not bail the pocket until he has to. He's not one of those guys who has the ridiculous legs where he's looking to bail the first sense of trouble, whatever. But one thing about his passing profile that is a little bit concerning is he doesn't attack the middle of the field. Last year, he was Jayden Daniels, 9 for 18 with a 2-to-1 TDI&T ratio, 10 to 20 yards down the field between the numbers. It's just not an area of the field that the LSU offense attacked. I'm not saying that he can't do it, but he was more the downfield guy and then attacking the sidelines and then his legs. So it's just a couple things to keep in mind with him. But yeah, he's a very good prospect that I think is going to go very high. I think he's going number 2.
Who was your top quarterback prospect a year ago?
Unfortunately, it was Bryce Young. I kicked myself all fall because,
mine was too. I thought he was an excellent prospect.
And I still look, I'm not throwing the dirt on Bryce Young yet. The story of Bryce Young has not been written yet. But I was talking about this last spring of if we had seen what we saw from CJ Stroud in that playoff game against Georgia prior to that, if we had a sample size of that was bigger than one game, he would have been my quarterback 1. It's just that we didn't get to see him excel under pressure, excel when moved off his spot, throwing the dimes, with the bullets flying, everything like that. Out on the perimeter without his base under him, different stuff like that, till that Georgia game. And so for me, that just elevated the risk just a little bit, just in my mind. Yeah, obviously, it wasn't in reality because he went to the NFL and was immediately a stud. But that's why I ended up siding ever so slightly with Bryce Young. I wish I could have that one back.
I ask you that because it's hard to do this because we have the information from the pros. But if it was like a courtroom and I said, remove everything you know about last season in the NFL, if you were doing a big board with Jayden Daniels in that class, would you have had him above Bryce Young?
Oh, that's interesting. I definitely would have had Caleb as the one.
For sure. He's his own little category.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that one. I would have had Jayden. Of course, you're throwing out the NFL from last year. I would have had him above CJ Stroud. If you toss that in, then of course you have to put CJ Stroud above him. But just as a prospect, the Daniels against Bryce Young would have been very close for me. Very, 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 very close. I probably would have had Daniels above Young, but that's pretty close.
One, obviously the Titans, they signed Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard. The way for a lot of these guys when they sign from a fantasy perspective is like, how's their quarterback going to play? I remember a couple of years ago watching Will Levis when Liam Cohen was the offensive coordinator at Kentucky. I'm like, this guy's got a chance to be like a top pick in the NFL. And then his senior year, Scangarella comes in, disaster falls. What are your thoughts on Will Levis? Because I get asked about that all the time. You watch him in the NFL, like college, the big arm, tries to run fucking people over. But there's more to playing quarterback. You got to have the touch. You got to have the feel. Obviously, this is going to be a huge year. It's kind of to be determined, but I feel like he's a pretty polarizing guy. A lot of people either hate him or go, there's something there. And we've seen a lot of guys, I would say, of the Will Levis mold. The majority have end up not working, right? But he's definitely intriguing, and now there's really no excuses with some of the talent around him.
Yeah, he for sure is. And I think he's one of those guys that, and you were sort of indicating this, the better the coaching is, the better the scheme is. I think the better that Levis is, and also the surrounding talent. He's not one of those guys who's going to elevate everyone around him because of some of the decision-making things and some things that are inherent to his game. But if everything else around him is good, I think that's when you start to see his natural skill set will play up a bit. The thing that can, like, the reason that I don't think he ever becomes the NFL star, and that I was a little bit lower on him last year in the process, the decision-making stuff, and then the other thing was the pocket presence, and then sensing the pass rushers. I saw that guy get crash test dummied from the blind side more times than I can count when he was at Kentucky. He just doesn't sense it very well. And then sometimes when he finally senses it, it's coming, he's about to get hit, he'd make a wonky decision. It's like, maybe you should have eaten it there. It's those kind of things that I don't know if that can be taught, that feel. There's things you can teach. We might be able to teach Jayden Daniels a slide. I don't know if you can teach a guy to sense free rushers coming from the blind side, how to manipulate spacing in the pocket, to help out your offensive line, give yourself more space to throw, different stuff like that. So that's my concern about Levis. But do I think he could be a league average NFL starting quarterback for a long time? 15, 16, 17 best quarterback in the league for a long time? Sure, absolutely.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. The first car I ever got, I was 16 years old, and my grandpa gave me a ride. And like any young lad who got a car that, let's face it, would not have been my first choice, I had to touch it up a little bit. And we tinted out the windows. We added a big subwoofer to the back, and you could hear me from miles away coming home. My parents sure loved me for that one. So did my neighbors. But I think the key to any young person getting a car is to personalize a little bit, because you're probably not going to get your dream car. And as you get older, you kind of become a car person or you don't. But you definitely have preferences, right? Some of us like bigger cars. I know I do. I've only had big cars, SUVs. And there are certain non-negotiables. I like 3 rows of seats. Now, ideally, I don't have kids right now, so I take out that 3rd row of seat, and I like a big, I like a lot of trunk room. Some people, don't like SUVs, like smaller cars. I've never been that big since my high school car of tinting the windows. I don't care if you see me or not, but I know some people, like, the first thing they do is tint the windows. It's crazy. The older you get, I had to have the subwoofers. The subwoofer, I couldn't listen to music for 5 minutes with the subwoofer like I did when I was younger. But there is something very, very special about that first car. I don't care how many cars you get since, how much money you make to get sweeter cars. You never quite forget that first ride and some of the memorable moments that you had in it in your high school years. So with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. You mentioned that Jayden is your number 2 and Maye is not 3rd on your draft board. Who is?
JJ McCarthy. I'm a huge fan of JJ McCarthy. Really, really good athlete. He's going to run in the high 4.4s or low 4.5s if he runs at his pro day. He didn't do that at the combine. What he did do, though, is weigh in 17 pounds heavier than he was listed at Michigan and did the 3-cone. He had the 5th fastest 3-cone at the entire NFL combine, irregardless of position. He's a former hockey player, so he has sort of the dual threat sport thing going on with that. Very good off-platform, out-of-structure guy, moving around. He becomes more dangerous when you move him off his spot. In contrast to some of these other guys in this class, Michael Penix is an example of a guy who his accuracy depreciates the more that you move him off his spot. McCarthy is the opposite of that. Love him moving around. He's just so fluid with that. He always keeps his eyes downfield and his upper body cocked to throw with his legs under him. He's just always in control with that. And that's why his accuracy, he takes the mechanics with him, so the accuracy doesn't depreciate on the move. I think last year was like 72.5% completions just in the overall, 71.5, something like that, while scrambling. So, just totally the same with that. He comes out of Jim Harbaugh's NFL factory, won the national championship as a 20-year-old, true junior. You have all that different stuff going for you. The PFF numbers on him are all great under pressure. You see that when you watch him, because he has all the tools in his bag to be able to get out of pressure and then solve those problems as well. I just think that there's a lot to like about his skill set.
Yeah, I know when I watched him, definitely down the stretch, just as a couch scout now, if you just live in the moment, you go, yeah, this guy looks like a second or third round pick to me. But then when you factor in, that's not how you draft a player, right? He's 20 years old. Does he have the physical characteristics? What's the character stuff like? And then obviously you got to factor in the operation in which he's playing in, which isn't exactly, the Mike Leach throwing,
That's
approach.
right.
So
Yeah.
I think he's definitely, would you say, you follow this very closely, one of the more polarizing prospects in recent memory? Because you're going to have people that think he's like a top 5 player. Other people think it's crazy to draft him high.
Definitely. Yeah. And especially in the quarterback class. But yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, you see a bigger band of outcomes of people like he's this or he's that, probably with JJ McCarthy than any other guy in this class. But just to your point, you see some really bad narratives out there about JJ McCarthy, especially about 5-6 weeks ago. There were some really bad, narratives about him like coming into the process. A lot of them just had to do with his counting stats. The thing that I would tell people out there, 11 out of the 15 games for Michigan last year, they had a 21+ point lead. In 7 of those 15 games, JJ McCarthy did not take one snap in the fourth quarter. But in the first half, when they were playing the good defenses, JJ McCarthy had a higher percentage of passes against top 25 defenses than any of the top 6 quarterbacks in this class did in the first half of their games against top 25 defenses. Not only that, JJ McCarthy played against by far the best defenses of those top 6 guys. Average defensive rank that Michigan played last year, 38.8. The other guys, Jayden Daniels, 46. Penix was 57. Drake Maye, 61. Caleb was 64. Bo Nix was 80. So you're facing the much better defenses. And then to the point of the offensive usage, you hear this argument of like, oh, Blake Corum, he was the reason that Michigan was good and JJ McCarthy didn't have to do anything. That's flat wrong. Look at Blake Corum last year. This is the world beater that they're suggesting. The guy had like an elusive rating of like 25 last year. 100 is considered solid for a running back. Blake Corum only had 2 yards after contact per attempt. Blake Corum did not have a great year last year. And then their receiving back, Donovan Edwards, was on a milk carton all fall.
Yeah,
so yeah, and what Michigan had was that mauling run blocking offensive line, which ranked number 2 PFF grading. So they would reset the line of scrimmage on first and second down, whatever. But when JJ McCarthy was given the opportunity to throw, invariably it was on third down. What is that scenario, John? It's when the defense knows what's coming. That is what the NFL cares the most about. Who is the best in the scenarios where the defense knows what's coming? JJ McCarthy was by margin best quarterback in this class, 3rd and long, 3rd and medium, 4th down, you all that different stuff. It's JJ McCarthy. And he did not have the receivers that Michael Penix did. He did not have the receivers that Bo Nix did. And he didn't get the empty calorie stats either. So like when you start looking at the correct stats, that's where JJ McCarthy starts to shine as the best quarterback in this class. The on-target rate, the 3rd down stuff, the high leverage stuff. That's where he starts to shine. The accuracy and the on-target rate on the move, different stuff like that. That's where he starts to shine as one of the best quarterbacks in this class.
When the biggest drive of his career didn't happen in the national championship game, right? It happened in the Final Four against Alabama, down.
Yes.
With not just his season on the line, but it felt like the weight of one of the biggest football programs in America riding on his shoulder, and he was pretty unflappable there. So I'm with you. I mean, 2 guys, Sam Darnold, $10 million. That's clearly a bridge quarterback. Gardner Minshew to the Raiders. I mean, I think those 2 teams are definitely sniffing around quarterbacks come whatever the draft is, a month and a couple weeks from now, right?
1000%. Yeah. The JJ McCarthy to Minnesota, that's obviously the train I'm on, in my neck of the woods. I think he is a perfect fit for what Kevin O'Connell always talks about, what he wants his offense to be, right? Moving the pocket, different stuff like that. The play action stuff. You can add some of the RPO stuff. And then O'Connell loves those layering concepts and attacking the middle of the field. There's some quarterbacks in this, Jayden Daniels we just talked about. That's one thing we didn't see as much with him last year. Michael Penix is another guy over the middle of the field. We didn't see much from him in college. JJ McCarthy's awesome over the middle of the field. Like, that's what he does. So it's on the move. It's attacking the middle of the field. Everything JJ McCarthy excels at, it's the things that you do in the NFL. It's the things that translate to the NFL. It's the things that the NFL values. So I just think it took the public a while to come around on it. They needed to hear it coming from the NFL, coming from the top down. I think some of the reporters out there, they hadn't had an opportunity to talk to their NFL sources until the NFL Combine. And once they did, you start hearing one by one those guys coming back and saying, all I'm hearing from the NFL, they're talking about this JJ McCarthy kid. I don't think that was because McCarthy had a really good combine performance. He did, but I don't think it was necessarily because of that. I think it was because that was the first opportunity for some of those reporters, the NFL draft media, to talk to their media sources inside the NFL and get a sense of like, oh, what, you like McCarthy that much? And you started to see him skyrocket in the rankings ever since then.
Yeah, well, a good example is I remember watching the Texas game, and Penix, one of the best games of his career, arguably the best.
Yes.
And I'm texting my buddies in the league. I'm like, this guy, top 10. And they're like, I got second round grades on him. And obviously, Texas is not very good on defense. Then he plays Michigan, which, let's face it, is much more like playing the Ravens, the Steelers, the Niners, the Rams. I mean, that's an NFL team. And it was a lot for him. And I'm a Penix guy, a West Coast bias. But you watch that game, one, not just his struggles, but two, he could barely get up by the end of the game. And it was a lot like that in Oregon. You hit him, you're like, would this guy last in the NFL? If TJ Watt or Nick Bosa or Khalil Mack, I mean, these guys are bigger in the NFL. There's no disputing his touch, but a lot like Tua. Now he's older and more injured. He's not a big time athlete, right? He's much more of a pocket precision passer. And you do the draft, like the day and age of those guys is kind of dying, right? You just lost Cousins, the Jared Goffs, like they don't really exist anymore. And those are not the guys coming in the NFL. So I was hyped up after the Texas game, but more and more information I have, I think it is fair to be a little concerned about how that translates. And again, if you get the guy in the third round, like 100%, but he's not going to go in the first round. Do you agree with that?
I definitely agree. Yeah. And I agree with the second round stuff is I think where he ends up going, at the end of the day. Obviously against Texas, he was awesome, like you mentioned. Then you see against Michigan, that was what it was. Texas, they had the really poor secondary. They weren't able to disrupt the timing of Odunze and Polk and McMillan at all. And so they just had a field day. If you can't disrupt the timing and you also are not putting pressure on Penix, he's going to light you up. It doesn't matter who you are. He's going to light you up all day. Where you start to take his game down, you take the pull out of the middle of the circus tent. It's by disrupting the timing of his receivers. It's why, by the way, Rome Odunze, if you look at the numbers, was pressed more at the line than any receiver in this class by far. It wasn't because anyone was successful doing it. It was because it was like an attempt at the opposing that you could make to try to disrupt the timing of that offense, like right after the snap, whatever. The other thing is pressuring Penix and pushing him off his spot, like I was mentioning before. I think of Penix as a sniper. Like you think of the sniper on top of the building, he's not moving at all. He's got the gun on top of the thing, whatever, and he's just sitting there. He's sitting there. He's sitting there. If you have to move the sniper off his spot, his accuracy gets worse the more he has to move. That is Michael Penix. If you just keep him there and he can just move there, he's going to pick you apart all day long. He'll be hitting cans 500 yards away, right?
That's what happened in Michigan, right? He was all over the map.
That's it. They had the pressure on him. They were also mugging his receivers off the line and zero separate. Well, I shouldn't say Odunze got separated a couple times, but at that point they were seeing so many ghosts. You remember that one near the sideline where Penix just overshot him? Yeah, he was wide open. So yeah, I mean, but like there was a lot of time. The normal flow of that offense was not happening, and because of that, the timing and the pressure, different stuff like that. Those are the scenarios where you see Penix's game depreciate a little bit, and because of that reason, he needs to go in the second round. But he's going to be playing early in his career, and he could have a pretty solid career. I think I comp him to a right-handed Geno Smith. He reminds me a lot of Geno coming out of West Virginia, if you just flip the picture. The arm very similar, the propensity in the pocket, likes to have the full field vision, the field spread, everything like that. I think there's a lot of similarities between those two.
Okay, get you a couple more questions here on quarterbacks. I got to go back and watch some earlier Drake Maye because early in the season, clearly he put up a lot of good stats. And then I remember midseason, all the hype. I flipped on the CW, and they had a stretch in the middle of the year. It was pretty ugly.
Yeah.
I think he lost the game. I remember the first game I watched, maybe to Georgia Tech or something. He lost a bad game, and he did not play well. And I was like, I don't quite see it. And I remember texting a scouting director. He's like, I'm glad we don't have to be in the quarterback mix because there are a lot. And this is at the time Jayden was still kind of an unknown, but like he was viewed as, a big time prospect. He's like, not that I don't see it, like I understand, but this notion that he's some, next Justin Herbert or something, like pump the brakes. Your thoughts on him? Obviously, he's not. You have Jayden and JJ McCarthy above him. Where do you rank him as a prospect, just relative to the last couple classes, just overall as a quarterback?
Yeah, so I have May quarterback 4 in this class, and I do have him in the overall top 10. I think he deserves to go in the top 10, so I don't want to nitpick him too bad, but I do think there's reasons, that you could argue, and certainly I have argued that maybe you could take JJ McCarthy over him. Certainly the other two guys I prefer over him. There's a couple things for me. 2022, Drake Maye leads UNC in rushing. There's nothing behind that. Sam Howell ran for over 1,000 yards in Phil Longo's system his last season there. That rushing utility is not translated to the NFL. Drake Maye this past season, they switched the offensive systems. That went way down. Drake Maye is not this stud kind of an athlete. The rushing utility is not translating to the NFL. He's going to be more or less a pocket passer in the NFL. I love the arm. He has the howitzer arm. He has really good touchdown field. That's why he dominated in that Phil Longo system in 2022. Longo loves to throw downfield more than anyone, and he give the quarterbacks the one-on-one shots. That's where Drake Maye is having fun, right? It's this past season where you start to see the struggles. They went into more, I don't want to call it a pro-style system, but it was more pro-style looks than they were doing with Longo, different stuff like that. So I guess you could, especially early in the season, the talent wasn't as good. Josh Downs had left. Tez Walker didn't get cleared by the NCAA till later on. I don't want to. There's people out there that are like, oh, they didn't have any talent last year. That's not true though. Like Tez Walker did come back. Tez Walker probably going to go in the second round. The Nesbitt kid's pretty good. Like they had guys out there. But the other thing for me, as far as Drake Maye goes, is so you don't have the rushing utility, and so he's going to be confined to the pocket. The thing that concerned me about him in the pocket, I don't want to say concern, but the thing that where it just lowered the grade for me a little bit with him is I like the way that he manages the pocket, but when the pass rush is starting to get there, but it's like not quite there, I noticed this bad habit of his just speed up his mechanics really quickly. Like it's like, oh man, I got to get the ball out. And so everything goes in fast forward when it wouldn't need to. You see him stop stepping into throws, right? Because then he's getting even closer to that pass rush. You see him start to like do this kind of a thing and try to, sort of just all arm and different stuff like that. And just like I said, speed up the process. The accuracy started to get a little bit errant in those situations. I think that's why you see the accuracy under pressure numbers pretty bad. Last year, Drake Maye against pressure, 39 for 90. That's 43% with a 7-5 TDI and T ratio. He had under a 60 PFF passing grade in those scenarios, took 28 sacks. I think that's what it speaks to. He also, going back to the athleticism thing, he doesn't have the athleticism to burst around, the pass rusher, make one guy miss, and then all of a sudden he's getting around at the edge. You see JJ McCarthy on his film, he'll make a guy miss. Now he's going this way. Now someone's coming trying to swipe out his legs from under him, but they can't even get his shoelace. He's jumping over him, whatever.
And obviously Caleb and Jayden fall under that category.
Of course.
Yeah.
And Drake Maye, he just doesn't have that. So he's confined back there. And because of that, you see some of these manifestations with him in the passing where it's just like, I need to get the ball out. That's one thing that they need to work on him with, of like, this is a situation where you had another half second to a full second where you need to reset, get your feet square, get your shoulders square to the target, and then step into it because your accuracy is going to play way up. That's one thing in his on-field game where if that was fixed or that improved, him as a passer is going to go way up. But that's one concern that I had about him.
Okay, went on Bo Nix, who I would say behind JJ McCarthy is going to be the second most polarizing quarterback. What's your take on him?
To me, he's a mid-third round guy, late third round guy. I know that he's probably going to go in the second round in the NFL draft, but my take on Bo Nix is the things that he struggled with at Auburn. It wasn't improvement that got those things to go away the last couple of years. It was the Oregon offensive system that addressed it for him. I'm talking about things of like standing in the pocket, having to survey all your options, going through multiple options, throwing downfield after surveying multiple options, different stuff like that. He has a decent arm, but it was forwarded as being like super strong earlier in the process. I saw some people putting that out there. It is not. He can spin it in the intermediate range. I think that's why people have this thought that he has like this super strong arm, but throwing it deep, he's one of those guys that has to throw the entire kitchen sink into it. So it's one of those deep balls where the ball starts to flutter or a gust of wind can push it towards the sidelines, different stuff like that. And the accuracy isn't very good with it. The other problem is when he has to sit back there in the pocket and survey those options downfield, like he's going to have to do in the NFL, he never showed that he had the pocket presence for that. He's not good at reading the defense after the snap. What he's very, very good at is reading it before the snap. Bo Nix will run your system for you. And that Oregon system was super duper smart. All he had to do was go to line, he count where is the numbers advantage, and that essentially told him where is the ball going. The ball would get out very quickly. Bo Nix, I believe, had the quickest time to release in this entire draft class, and he also, I believe, had the second lowest A dot. The only guy lower than him, I'm doing this off memory, so if I'm a little off, forgive me, was Austin Reed of Western Kentucky, the classic air raid offense that Clay Helton runs down there, whatever. It's a Mickey, or I'm sorry, his brother Tyson Helton, Clay runs it at Georgia Southern. But everyone acknowledges that version of the air raid, it's a Mickey Mouse offense where it doesn't really translate to the NFL. Bo Nix was running more or less the same thing. Like, I mean, if you look at the A dot, the average time to throw, different stuff like that, Bo Nix and Austin Reed, it's like looking in a mirror. I know that Bo Nix was better at that, but the things that I trust Bo Nix with in the NFL, it's he'll run the system, he has decent mobility, and I like his accuracy short and more or less into the intermediate range. It's the rest of the stuff where it starts to fall apart for me. So maybe you could try to build an efficient offense around him that didn't have any of the explosive element. I think you're asking for trouble if you ask him to sit back there and try to generate explosive plays for you.
2 words, Sean Payton.
I could see that one. Desperation is a stinky cologne, and the Broncos are in a very desperate situation right now with their quarterback, and it's looking like they could be the ones. I mean, this would be the betting favor right now on the board that they're going to be the ones that are boxed out of those top 4 quarterbacks. In fact, it's getting harder and harder to envision them getting up to be being able to take one of the top 4 quarterbacks. They're behind the Vikings. The Giants are a clear and present danger. The top 3 teams right now, you would put them as favorites to take quarterbacks. If that's the case, the Broncos are sort of stuck back there. And then it's like, are you going to overdraft someone at 13 or wherever, 12, wherever they're sitting? Or do you trade back, or do you do it, with they don't have the second round pick. People need to remember that as well. But Bo Nix is a guy I could see as frustration and inertia starts to set in for Sean Payton here over the next 5 weeks, as he realizes he doesn't have any cap room. He's not going to be able to go out and sign you one. And as he realizes the draft equity in Denver's situation is not very good as well, the only way that you're going to be able to swing getting into the top 5, and by the way, you're not doing that with the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh is not trading an interdivision rival, his son, JJ McCarthy. It is not happening. So they need to get up to number 4 or to number 3. I don't know about that. You're going to have to give up your first, your third, your fourth, your next year's 1 to even begin that conversation. And you're probably going to have to give up your 1 after that as well. So now you have no draft picks for years. You also have no cap room. I just don't know. They're in a tough situation. But yeah, I think Bo Nix, I could see Sean Payton watching his film and being like, oh, this is a college veteran who had a lot of experience. He was a little over 6 foot. The mechanics are nice and tight. He's accurate, short, and intermediate. He reminds me of a guy I used to work with in New Orleans. I could see Sean Payton just slowly, day after day, talking himself into the idea of Bo Nix and then just egregiously overdrafting Bo Nix.
Okay, actually, one more. I saw this during the combine. Their measurables were very similar, and that's Brock Bowers and Sam Laporta. And Bowers has been one of the better players in college football over his 3-year stretch. I'm from Northern California. He was a Napa kid, ends up at the powerhouse program and kicks ass. Now, the tight end position kind of polarizing. Do you draft a guy really high, given that, they technically don't make that much money? I don't see a scenario where he's not a good player. given the way the game's played, given his versatility, where he's the Laporta, Kelsey, they're just a dominant wide receiver. Most linebackers are not going to be able to cover him. As a prospect in this draft, where do you have him?
Yeah, and I compliment George Kittle, by the way. I went to grad school at Iowa. It sort of feels like he should have been an Iowa tight end. Of
It
course, he
does.
couldn't. Yeah, Kirby Smart, listen to this, is like, Kirby Smart, by the way, said if Brock Bowers, if they had used him at running back the last couple of years, Brock Bowers would have been the best running back on the roster. I don't think of Brock Bowers as a tight end. He's an offensive weapon. He can win on the outside. He can win in the slot. He can play in line, shift him into the backfield. You can do the end around stuff with him. He's
Yeah,
sort of like the Debo Samuel of tight ends.
I
And if
like it.
you hand him the ball, he was great as a runner at Georgia. Just manufacture touches for that guy and watch him go. The fit with the Chargers, you saw a lot of the mocks where he's going 5. I think that's a little too high just for the player and the type and the position where we're at in the NFL right now. But this goes back into what we were talking about the trade down scenario, where I think the Chargers have every incentive to try to move down. The Vikings at 11, they come calling. You're going to have to offer your first round pick next year. So it's going to be 11. It's going to be your 2025 first rounder. The Vikings will probably have to also toss in a late day 3 this year. That should get it done. You can't take Brock Bowers at number 5, I don't think. You know where you could take him, though?
11.
Number 11. And then you pay him less as well. Then you also have a future first round pick and different stuff like that. That's what I think would be a really good fit, and a guy that Jim Harbaugh would obviously love.
Thor, tell everyone where they can find your stuff.
You can find my stuff on Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros. We have the Fantasy Pros NFL Draft Show with me and Derek Brown, which I'm hoping that you will join us on very
Oh,
soon,
hell
John.
yeah.
Chop it up about some more prospects. This was a ton of fun. And you can find me on Twitter at ThorKU.
Thanks, Thor. Take it easy,
Appreciate
bro.
it. Hey, good talking to you.